Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the fourth meeting of BGS International Founders Week, a great initiative that first started off with BGS Assessi. Thank you guys so much for joining in. We've had some wonderful sessions in the past couple of days with Florida Gulf Coast University, BGS Malaysia, and also BGS Istanbul. It's been some wonderful sessions going on, and I'm glad it's our turn. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Samer Hijazi. I am the current marketing officer for Beta Gamma Sigma here at UT Arlington. I'm very excited to have you all here today. Today we have a very exciting presentation given by our own chapter advisor, Dr. Stephanie Rasmussen. Dr. Stephanie Rasmussen is also an associate professor of accounting here at UT Arlington. She's involved a lot with academia, hence the topic that she'll be presenting tonight is positioning yourself for a career in academia. We will be allowing questions at the end of the presentation. If you do have questions, you're more than welcome to use the chat feature, or you could raise your hand and we can call that out on you so that you can unmute your mic. So without further ado, Dr. Rasmussen, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Samer. Welcome, everyone. I'm just delighted to be able to be here with you tonight and talk to you about careers in academia. I love my job, and I think for those students who have interacted with me a lot know that. And so I just could not imagine a better way to spend my night than to explain to you why I love my job and hopefully get some of you excited about a career in academia. So, as Samer said, there will be plenty of time for questions at the end. Samer, can you or someone else confirm that you're able to see my screen okay?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, great. So, I've entitled this presentation Positioning Yourself for a Career in Academia. And really, my intent tonight is to help inform you about what a career in academia is like and how you would put yourself in a position to pursue that type of career. From my perspective, the best way to position yourself for anything is to really be informed. Okay. And so that's what my goal is with this presentation tonight. So, just to quickly show you the agenda I'll be covering, first, I'm welcoming you and want to introduce myself in a little more detail. I then want to talk about what I've labeled myths versus facts of academic careers. And there are several things I'll touch on there just to make sure you have a decent understanding of what careers in academia are really like. Once I've gone through that, we'll talk about whether a career in academia might be right for you. And I'll point out some pros and potential cons of the career to help you kind of think about whether this might be something you would want to consider for your future. Then I will give you some specific advice on how to position yourself for a career in academia. And finally, I want to take some time at the end to talk about what a PhD program is like, because for most of us in academia, we do obtain that PhD qualification in order to pursue this type of a career. Then, of course, there will be some questions at the end. Now, just a disclaimer or a note, I do want to point out that the content in this presentation really is based solely on my experiences that have all been at US-based business schools. I attended US-based business schools for all of my academic degrees, and I have been teaching only at US-based business schools. And the reason I think that's important to point out is that those of you who do not live in the United States would definitely benefit from speaking to some of the faculty at your own schools to get their experiences and understand how things may differ for academic careers in other countries. All right, so with that, Samer's already told you a little bit about me. I am an associate professor of accounting here at UT Arlington, and I'm the chapter advisor for Beta Gamma Sigma. But I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of background on what my progression was that led me to be here at UTA. So to start, I earned my bachelor's degree in finance at a university here in the United States called Minnesota State University Moorhead. This is a state university. It had roughly 8,000 students when I was there, and so it's a lot smaller than where I'm teaching today. After that, I attended the University of Tennessee at Knoxville and I earned my MBA. And I went straight from a bachelor's program into a master's program, in part because I just honestly wasn't ready to get a job yet. But also, I knew that there would be a huge difference, both in terms of the position I would be able to obtain and the pay I would be able to obtain if I had a bachelor's degree versus a master's degree. I knew I would be much further ahead to pursue the master's degree. And so that's what I did. But I will say, I knew by the time I graduated with my bachelor's degree that I eventually wanted to be a college professor. And so all of the choices I made after that were pretty strategic to help do what I thought would be to best position me for that type of career. Getting the MBA degree, as I said, was going to put me in a position both to earn more money and have a more interesting or higher level position once I did take on a job. And I did strongly believe it was important to have some real world work experience before going back to get a PhD and entering academia. I knew both from my experiences as an undergraduate student and a master's student that I found my professors to be much more credible in the classroom if they had real world work experience. And I wanted to make sure I had that before I entered academia. So after earning my MBA, I spent 5 years working at a semiconductor manufacturing company called On Semiconductor. And this was a really interesting company to be at the time. It had originally been a division of Motorola, which I'm sure is a company many of you have heard of. Motorola was a huge, very well known, very profitable company for many years. And they had a lot of diverse operations. Well, On Semiconductor was one of those divisions that spun off. It actually became a publicly traded company shortly before I began working there. And so the people I worked with had this really interesting perspective of both having been with a large corporation for many years before this company was spun off, and also going through that process of now being publicly traded and having to report filings to external users such as the SEC, investors, et cetera. So I spent 5 years there doing a variety of accounting and finance work. And after that, I felt ready to get my PhD and go into academia. So I applied to about 10 PhD programs. I was accepted to two, and the one I chose to attend was Texas A&M University. And I earned my PhD in accounting. Now, while my undergraduate degree was in finance, I had found that most of my work experience really related to managerial accounting. And that was the area I was interested in studying at the PhD level and eventually teaching. Okay, so that's some background on me. So why did I choose a career in academia? I said I knew from the point I was an undergraduate student that I wanted to eventually end up in academia. And what led me to that choice were the following three things. First, I was very passionate about learning. You may know students, and maybe some of you are students who are there to get your degree, and you are so ready to get that completed and start your career. I was not that student. I would have been a professional student for my entire life if I could have been paid to do that. I just loved being on a college campus. I loved taking classes that I was able to choose, studying things that were interesting to me, and just being in that academic environment was my love. And so I knew I wanted to find a way to continue that long term. I also knew I was very skilled at teaching others. Although I hadn't actually been a teacher, I did a lot of tutoring and a lot of interacting with other students. And I knew from those experiences that I had a skill at finding ways to explain things to people so that they could understand them. I also really enjoyed public speaking, and that just kind of fit well with this idea of wanting to learn and continue that myself throughout my life, and also being able to teach and help others. And lastly, as a woman, I knew that I wanted a career that would provide flexibility when the day arrived that I had my own children. And it's interesting. My mom never even went to college. She has a high school degree. She spent many years at home when my sister and I were children. And I knew that wasn't what I wanted. I really did want a career, but I wanted something that provided flexibility. And I knew, based on other career paths I could have taken, that they would not have given me the flexibility I eventually wanted. So all of that led me to choose academia as a career. So now let me tell you about some myths versus facts, because some of these myths I believed when I made the decision to go into academia, and I kind of learned my lesson the hard way. So I'd like you to have this information now as you're maybe just starting to think about academia as a possibility. The first myth is that professors spend all of their time teaching and interacting with students. This is not true. The fact is, professors, at least those of us with PhDs, are responsible typically for teaching, research, and service. So, what does that really look like for a professor? Well, in my case, as an associate professor, I am expected to split my time something like this. All right, I'm expected to spend 40% of my time teaching, 40% of my time conducting research and working to publish papers, and about 20% of my time providing service to the university or my department. And these are all areas that I am evaluated on each year in my annual performance reviews. These three areas are also all considered when tenure track faculty like me go up for promotion. Now, while this is the ideal, I can tell you my typical year doesn't look like this. In the last few years, just with strange things like COVID and these last few weeks with strange weather here in Texas, I have spent a lot more of my time on the teaching and service side, and what has kind of fallen short is the research. But the idea is that over time, I should create a balance where I'm roughly spending an equal amount of time teaching and doing research, and then there's a small portion of time on that service side as well. All right, another myth. Professors only work for 9 months out of the year. The fact is, professors are typically paid a 9 month salary, but many of us perform university responsibilities all year long. Some years, that 9 month salary is all I get. But other times, there may be opportunities for extra pay available in those other 3 months. And so let me give you some examples of things I often do in the summertime here in the US when I am not typically teaching. I use the summer as a big time to make progress on my research. And that's because I'm not teaching at that time, and it really is a good opportunity to just fully devote myself to certain research projects and make sure I'm making good progress on those. Summer in the last few years has also been a time when I've spent a lot of time supervising PhD students. Many PhD students that I work with have projects they're working on as summer papers, which is something I'll mention a little later in the presentation, or they are really pushing to finish that dissertation and graduate. And many times, even for myself, I graduated in the summer. And so there was a lot of work I was wrapping up in late spring and into those summer months. And I needed PhD supervision at that time when I was a student. And I'm finding many of the PhD students I work with also need that supervision and help in the summer months. So those are two things oftentimes I will perform in the summer and get no pay for. But that does kind of fall in with that general service responsibility I have at the university, at least the supervising side does. Other things I might do in the summer are preparing curriculum for the next term, particularly if I'm doing something like changing a textbook for the courses I teach. There's a lot of prep that I would put in the summer to get ready for that fall semester to make sure everything was up and running and ready for my students as soon as the semester begins. And then the last two items I have listed here, while I have not been involved in, I know many of my colleagues are involved in these types of things in the summer. Many times there are opportunities to take visiting positions at foreign universities, and those visiting positions will often be in the summer months. I have a colleague who for many years has gone to the Philippines every summer and taught for about 6 weeks at a university there. I've known a lot of people who have gone to India or China or maybe even Australia or European countries, and they'll go for a 6 to 8 week period in the summer and teach some classes at those universities. Now, that is something you would be paid for if you took on a visiting position in the summer months. I also know several faculty that lead study abroad trips for students at their universities. And again, because of how school schedules works, many times those study abroad trips do take place in the summer. That's actually something I'm hoping kind of on my bucket list of things I would like to be able to accomplish in my career. And so hopefully I'll have an opportunity to lead some students on study abroad in the future. Another myth is that you must have a PhD to have a career in academics. Now, while probably roughly 70 to 75% of faculty members at AACSB accredited universities do have a PhD. The fact is, a PhD is not required. It is typically required for what we would call tenure track faculty, but those that are considered non-tenure track can have either a PhD or a master's degree. All right, so I've thrown out some terms here you're probably not familiar with. So let's talk about what I mean by these. First, let's talk about what I'm meaning by tenure track faculty. Tenure track faculty are faculty that have both those teaching and research responsibilities that I talked about a little while ago. And so we would call those tenure track faculty either tenured faculty, meaning they have tenure, and that just suggests they've been promoted at some point, or faculty that are tenure seeking. And so when I first graduated with my PhD and in the first several years of my teaching career, I was a tenure seeking faculty member because I was involved in that teaching and research, but I didn't have my tenure yet. All right. And now some of you may not know what tenure is, but hold off on that. I will get to that and answer those questions on the next slide, okay? I do want to take this opportunity, though, to explain what I mean by non-tenure track faculty. Non-tenure track faculty, at least from my experiences here in the US, are typically faculty that have mainly teaching responsibilities. They often have no research responsibilities, or if they are involved in research, it's to a much lesser extent than someone like me. And so I've grouped what I would call non-tenure track faculty into three different categories. And as I mentioned just a minute ago, these non-tenure track faculty may in some cases have PhDs, but many of them have a master's degree as their highest degree. So the first category is what I would call clinical faculty. These typically are faculty members with a PhD, but for whatever reason, they are not interested or wanting to be heavily involved in research. And so they have a PhD. They're going to be the highest paid faculty within this non-tenure track group because of that PhD, but they are going to be primarily hired to teach. Then we would have instructors. Instructors are full-time teachers at the university, but they typically have a master's degree as their highest level of degree. And then we have what I would call adjunct faculty. These are also individuals with a master's degree. They are not employed full-time by the university. They might be hired to come in and only teach one or two classes in a term. Okay, so all of these non-tenure track faculty, again, are focused primarily on teaching. The tenure track faculty have that responsibility to balance both teaching and research. All right, so now let's talk about tenure. What is tenure anyway? Well, tenure basically refers to an indefinite employment appointment, okay? Or you can think about it as job security. That's the way I always thought about it initially. So how does tenure work? Well, in the US, tenure is typically granted when a professor is promoted from assistant professor to associate professor. I began my career at UT Arlington as an assistant professor, and that is the common title for people taking on their first academic position after they've completed their PhD. But you cannot be an assistant professor at a university indefinitely. Interestingly enough, after 6 years at a university as an assistant professor, that faculty member is going to be required to either apply for tenure and go up for consideration for that, or at that point, voluntarily leave the academic appointment at that university. Each university then has its own tenure process and its own tenure requirements. So I submitted a huge document to UT Arlington that was first reviewed by my department, then by my College of Business, and then by the university as a whole to decide if they wanted to grant me tenure or not. The focus on that tenure review is largely on research. As I said earlier, though, teaching and service are also other important responsibilities of a faculty member. And so my tenure packet, or that documentation I submitted when I applied for tenure, did include information on my research, teaching, and service activities. But the real focus of all of those different levels that reviewed that packet was my research activity. Without good research, you are not going to get tenure. You could be an excellent teacher, but without a strong research record, you will not get tenure. Now, on the other hand, just because you have a phenomenal research record does not mean you will get tenure. If you have been rated as a terrible teacher by your students and you have not provided adequate levels of service to your university, even with an excellent research record, you would likely be denied tenure. So there is some balance in there, but again, the heavier weight is going to be placed on your research. Now, fortunate for me and for many people I know, they go through this tenure review process. The packet is approved, the individual receives tenure and is promoted to this next level of professor, which here in the United States is called associate professor. If I had not received tenure and promotion, I would have been given a 1-year contract extension with my university, after which I would have had to leave. So that's basically just to give you time to find another job and move somewhere else to continue your academic career. Okay, so it is a little harsh. I have also seen instances where someone maybe realizes they don't have the research record to earn that tenure or qualify for tenure at their school. They might at that point try to convert to a non-tenure track position. Maybe they want to try to switch to a clinical professor position and stay at that same university. I've seen that done as well, but most times if people do not earn tenure or realize they probably don't have the qualifications to earn tenure at their school, they will go find a position at another university, typically restarting as a new assistant professor, working there for 6 years, and then going through the tenure process at that school. All right, so that might be a little more than you wanted to know about tenure, but this is something that I think is almost kind of a black box. Many people don't have a really good understanding of this before they enter into the world of academia. So as I said, I called tenure job security. And so I do now have an indefinite employment position with the University of Texas at Arlington. That could always be revoked if I do something to, what's the best way to say this? If I do something just to completely discredit the university, perform unethically, I could obviously be removed. It's not a permanent guarantee of a position. But in most cases, it's very unlikely for someone who is an associate or a full professor to be terminated by the university. One of the most important things, though, about tenure and the real purpose of it is that it provides academic freedom to professors. Tenure allows professors to say what they think, conduct the research they want to conduct, and not feel like they have to do something that is going to make them popular or do something that is going to always bring positive attention to their university. It really does allow you to go out there, conduct your research, and report what you find, whatever it may be, whether it makes people happy or not. Okay, so let's get back to a few more myths versus facts. This next myth is pay is low for university professors. I've had students come into my office over the years and basically express pity toward me because they think I don't make a lot of money as a teacher. Okay, well, the fact is pay depends a lot and it varies significantly, which I'll show you in a second. But the pay really depends on your rank, what type of a position you have at the university, and what academic field you're in. But I can tell you that those of us who teach in business schools actually earn very good pay and are often near the high range of the pay within our university. This is in comparison to other fields such as liberal arts and even education, the schools of education. So let me give you some statistics based on pay. And I have a graph here to show you. So this data comes from the AACSB. I know we are all at AACSB accredited schools, and the AACSB conducts a salary survey every year. This is their most recent data from their 2019 to 2020 salary survey. And again, this is focused on business schools, which is what the AACSB is all about. Now, the salary data I'm showing here is what was reported for the 75th percentile of schools that reported. And I'm telling you this data for a few reasons. First, you are all excellent students at the top of your classes because you are in BGS. If you are to pursue a career in academia, there is no reason you would likely be at a school that isn't ranked high compared to others around the world. Okay, because you're very qualified students. And if you go to pursue a PhD or decide to pursue a career in academia, I would expect you to end up at a very high ranked school. Okay, I'm also reporting the 75th percentile because this is roughly where schools like the University of Texas at Arlington attempt to pay their faculty members. And so I wanted you to know that as well. Now, I will tell you that this salary survey that was conducted was surveying business schools around the world. However, roughly 80% of the respondents were US schools. So that means these salary figures you see here, and that I'll talk through in a second, really are based on US business schools. And so you would need to explore what the pay is like for academic positions in your country if you are outside the United States. But a few things I want to point out. If you look at the blue bars, that is the level of pay for instructors across the different business disciplines. And you can see it varies a little, but it's all roughly around $100,000 a year. Now, again, that would be considered a 9-month salary. And so if the faculty were to teach in the summer, that would be extra pay, and they would get paid an additional amount above and beyond this roughly $100,000 per year. The other bars represent orange is assistant professor, gray is associate professor, and yellow is full professor. Again, you'll see some variation in these, but a few things I do want to point out. If you look just at the orange bar, which would be the expected salary for a new assistant professor with a PhD, the highest pay is going to come in two business disciplines, accounting and finance. In both cases, it's close to or slightly above $200,000 per year. Again, that is a 9-month salary. The lower pay for the disciplines in the business school for assistant professors is going to be management and economics, and those are both kind of in the $150,000 to $170,000 per year range. The gray lines you'll see are very close to the orange. So associate professors are paid relatively close to assistant professors. Part of that is what we're referring to these days as salary inversion. We are in a situation where there are not always enough new PhDs to fill the open positions. And so that those that are out there are getting paid a premium just because we don't have enough people to fill these open positions. And so sometimes assistant professors will come in and earn more than the faculty who have been at the school for a while. But typically, the expectation is when you do get promoted from assistant to associate, you do earn some type of a salary increase at that point along with the promotion. So many of what's kind of skewing this data is really the newest hires at the assistant position level being paid more than the people were paid, say, 6 years ago when they started as assistant professors. So hopefully that makes sense. If you have questions on that, you can let me know. But from my perspective, you can make good money as a professor at a business school, particularly here in the United States, when you have a PhD. And in many cases, professors will earn more than they would if they were in industry. Okay, again, that kind of varies based on the discipline and what position you might be shooting for. Within, say, finance and accounting, a CEO at a firm likely makes much more than I do as a faculty member. However, if my career trajectory was never to reach that CFO position and perform somewhere lower than that, my pay might actually be pretty comparable today as a professor to what I've been earning in industry. Again, it just kind of depends on what you were shooting for as a career and what type of a position you're willing to take, how that pay might compare to being an academic. All right. So is a career in academia right for you? Let me go through some pros and cons. First, let's talk about the pros. These were many of the things that really attracted me to a career. An academic career gives you significant freedom in your work. I have some freedom in terms of what I teach. I've narrowed in on managerial accounting as really the teaching area that's most interesting to me. And so my department works with me to keep me teaching managerial accounting classes. Now, which managerial accounting class I teach might vary from one time period to another, but I'm able to stay within that realm, which is what I'm interested in. I also have significant freedom when it comes to my research. No one tells me what to research. I get to pick the topics that are interesting to me and pursue those either on my own or with colleagues. And that's something I enjoy tremendously, to have that level of freedom in what I spend my time on when it comes to research. Another pro is you're constantly challenged to learn. With research, you are always reading work performed by others and doing new work yourself. You're having to review what statistical methods will make the most sense to analyze the data I have. Um, you have to keep up with the news. You have to keep up with trends, as I said, with what others are researching. And so you're constantly reading things and continually being pushed to learn and challenged. You're also surrounded by very smart and creative colleagues, which is something I really enjoy. Talk about a place where every day you can sit down and have lunch with really interesting people who have very different backgrounds and very different perspectives and have very interesting conversations. I can't imagine a better place in the world to do that than working at a university. You have a flexible work schedule in many cases. In my case, I typically teach 2 or 3 classes in a semester. When I'm not in class, I have a lot of flexibility in terms of whether I'm working from home or working in the office. Um, that has been wonderful when, especially when I had young children who might be ill on my non-teaching days. It was very easy for me to be home taking care of them. I also know that many faculty members in academia will do other work besides their university appointment. So, like I said, you often have some time in the summer where you're not teaching. While many of us might be working on research, I have a lot of colleagues who, after many years, aren't as involved in the research. And so now they do things like consulting, or maybe they're authors on textbooks, or they use some of their summertime or off times to do those types of things as well. And finally, I've always found that working with young adults keeps me young at heart, and that's one of the reasons I was always very interested in academia, and I still love it today. Now, of course, with everything, there are some cons. I'm going to call these potential cons because I think it really depends on you and whether these would be cons or not. As I said a moment ago when I was talking about salaries, you might be able to earn more in industry than you would as an academic. So if you think about what your long-term pay might be, you may earn less in academia. And I discussed that salary inversion where assistant professors in many cases are now being paid more than faculty members who have many years of experience, because there just is not that supply of PhDs we need to fill all of the open positions. So some may view that as a con. Also, as I said, many university professors do have PhDs. And I know at least within accounting, a PhD really isn't very valued by industry. And so if you spend and invest all of that time and energy into earning a PhD, you are kind of narrowing yourself down to an academic position. Because if I was to leave academia, no one's necessarily going to hire me just for my PhD. All right. They would want me to contribute in other ways, and they would probably be more interested in professional certifications at that point if I was to go back to industry than they would be interested in my PhD. And so that's just something to consider because getting the PhD is a big commitment. All right. So now let's talk about maybe you're thinking, "Man, I'm interested in this. I want to really think about this career in academia." Well, if that's what you're thinking, these are some key pieces of advice I would give you today. First, I would encourage you to go talk to your favorite professors about their careers. Ask them about the career path they took to get to academia and ask them for their advice if you're interested in that type of a career. They have a wealth of knowledge to share with you, particularly those of you who are outside the United States, because most of what I've been providing here in terms of information tonight really is focused largely on US business schools. The next thing I would advise all of you to do is develop excellent oral and written communication skills. Those skills are going to benefit you no matter what you do in your career. But if you go into academia, you need those oral communication skills for teaching, and you really need the written communication skills for the research. Because those are the two key components of an academic career for someone with a PhD, you want to make sure those skills are strong. Lastly, I would also ask you to really seriously consider obtaining professional certifications and work experience. As I said earlier in my presentation, I strongly believed that work experience was important to me to provide credibility when I was in the classroom. And I know when we even look at candidates for our PhD program, we are looking to see what work experience did they have and what professional certifications do they have, because we know that's going to be important for when they get a job later on. It'll having those things, professional certifications and strong work experience, will better position them to get academic appointments once they finish their PhD. Now, if you are considering a PhD, a few other things I would really recommend you do is first research PhD programs around the world to find a good fit for you. There are excellent PhD programs worldwide, and you want to find a school that really is going to put you in a great position to get the type of academic position you want, uh, and especially where you would want that position to be geographically. Because research is such an important aspect of academic careers, I would also encourage you now to start perusing academic research papers. A few good sources would be ssrn.com, which is Social Science Research Network. This is where professors post what we call working papers. They're research papers that are still in early stages that have not yet been accepted by a journal. But that's a great place to see what are kind of the cutting edge papers out there. What are things we will potentially see published in journals within the next few years? And you can do keyword searches in there based on topics that are interesting to you and see what types of thing people are researching and how they go about conducting that research. You could also look for recent publications of our top field journals, and I've listed the names of some here. So for instance, if you're interested in accounting, the Accounting Review is considered the premier accounting journal in the United States and by many in the world. And so if you went and looked at a recent issue of that, you could see some papers that have been recently published and start to get a feel for what research would look like in that field. There's some other discipline journals listed here as well for those of you who might be listed in other areas. If you're interested, in the other hand, on non-tenure track positions, maybe you're someone who thinks, well, I want to work in industry, but maybe I would just like to teach one class a semester. Well, then I would encourage you to start networking with local universities. Get to know the head of the department in whatever discipline you're interested in. Tell them, you would be interested one day in maybe having a non-tenure track position, and find out from them what specific qualifications they would want those individuals to have. That would help you figure out what you would need to do to position yourself for those types of positions. Okay, so I know I don't have a whole lot of time left, but I do want to take maybe the last 5 minutes or so before we open it up for questions to talk about a little bit about PhD programs, because to really get those premier academic positions and put yourself in the position to make the most money as an academic, you really are going to need a PhD. So, a little information about the admissions process for PhD programs. In some ways, it's like applying for a master's program. You're going to have to take tests like the GMAT, GRE, TOEFL if you're an international student, and those scores are all looked at very closely as part of your admission packet. The schools you apply to will also be very interested in your past academic performance in terms of your grades you've earned for prior classes you've taken. And they're also going to be very interested in what specific degrees you have earned at other universities. You will also need letters of recommendation. If you're someone like me who spent some time in industry before going back to get my PhD, I had some letters of recommendation from professors when I was in my bachelor's degree and my master's degree, but I also had a letter of recommendation from someone I had worked for or worked with at that manufacturing company for the most recent 5 years leading up to going into a PhD program. And then you'll often be asked to write a research statement. Again, the focus of academia typically is on research more so than teaching. even though teaching is what often motivates many of us to get a PhD. And so you need to be able to think about what types of topics you might be interested in researching and be able to articulate that as part of your application packet for PhD programs. Once you submit an application to PhD programs, the schools will typically narrow down their list of applicants to those they want to first screen with a Skype or a Zoom interview. And then in a non-COVID world, they would often bring their short list of candidates to campus for on-campus interviews, almost like a job type search, and then decide which of those candidates they would want to accept. In some cases, though, especially if you're an international student, most of your interviews would typically be conducted virtually, and you would receive your admission decision based on those interviews. So what is a PhD program like in terms of support? AACSB business schools that have PhD programs typically provide scholarships for all of their PhD students to cover their tuition and fees while they're in their PhD program. I had to pay no out-of-pocket money as a PhD student for academic expenses. Okay. I also, and again, this would be common across AACSB accredited schools here in the US. I earned a stipend, a monthly pay for working as a research and a teaching assistant while I was a PhD student. And typically, you're expected to work around 20 hours per week for faculty members within your department. But that pay alone may be enough to cover your living expenses while you are a PhD student, particularly if you're someone who's single and has very low expenses and the freedom to move to attend a PhD program. Most students that I have known over the years who earned a PhD took on very little to no debt in order to pursue that PhD. And so the university that accepts you really is putting a huge investment in you as a PhD student to pay for your education and pay you a stipend in order to cover living expenses while you are in their program. So what's the program like as a PhD student? Well, you typically are accepted into a program with a small cohort of students. And so what this means is with any field, say accounting, which is what I am in, schools will often admit somewhere between 2 to 7 PhD students into their accounting program each year. When I was a PhD student at Texas A&M, I was one of 4 students who was admitted into a cohort together. But we had some cohorts at Texas A&M with only 2 students and others with 5 or 6. It just kind of varied by year and based on the quality of applicants they had in that given year. PhD programs are a year-long curriculum. You don't have summers off as a PhD student. You'll be taking the first 2 years of coursework, which consists of seminars within your field. So for me, that was accounting. All of those seminars were geared toward teaching me how to research and becoming familiar with the accounting research that had already been conducted. We also took several tools classes, what I'll call tools, and these were things like statistics, econometrics, nowadays data analytics, things that are going to help you perform your research. After those 2 years of academic curriculum, we had to pass comprehensive exams. If you don't pass your comprehensive exams, you could be eliminated from the PhD program at that point. But again, your school is putting a big investment in you and they really do want to help you pass those. So once you pass your comprehensive exams, you would move into the dissertation phase, and that's going to be your focus for the remainder of your time there, conducting your own unique research that you can justify and present in order to show proof that you deserve that PhD. Along the way, you'll often have to complete what are called summer papers. These are shorter papers that you typically do in the summer months. And these are just ways of demonstrating to the faculty that you are able to go through that entire research process on your own. And it gives them some confidence before you move into that dissertation phase. The PhD program does require a significant amount of self-discipline and personal motivation. I have personally seen over the years the people who are most successful in PhD programs are people who have had full-time work experience prior to entering the PhD because they are used to a 40-hour or more job per week. And when they come into a PhD program, they treat it like that. And they're able to keep themselves on a schedule and ensure they reach their goals and their milestones along the way because your professors are not going to be the ones really forcing you to meet those milestones. It's really up to you to be self-motivated to do that. PhD programs in business typically take between 4 to 7 years to complete. I graduated in 4 years. I can tell you at UTA, most of our students are graduating in 5 or in some cases 6 years. So it does take time, but I view it as a huge payoff later on to have that PhD. Now, I know I've given you a lot of information tonight, but I'm really interested and excited to hear what questions or comments you have and hopefully answer those before we need to wrap up tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rasmussen. That was a very insightful presentation. I loved it. I'm pretty sure so many of us have. We do have a question from Kayla. Kayla is from Florida Gulf Coast University.
Okay.
Kayla's question is, even though there are a few students in the PhD program, how often are scholarships given in PhD programs?
They always are. I don't, well, let me back up just a second there. Okay. I guess I would have to say it kind of depends on the university, but I personally don't know anyone who has gone through a business PhD program and not received scholarships to cover all of their tuition and fees while they were a PhD student. I would think if the only risk there would be, at least here in the US, of schools not giving that level of scholarship to their PhD students would be schools that are kind of on the lower end of the research quality. Other questions?
Feel free to raise your hand or unmute your mic if you have a question, or type it in the chat if you'd like.
Yeah, so hi doctor.
Hello.
Hello, okay, I can't really on my camera right now. All right. So I really enjoy your presentation. Yeah, I'm Aida from BGS Malaysia. So I really enjoy your presentation. Like this topic is really close to my heart because it relates a lot of a working woman because we will have to consider our family and to have to really consider of the flexibility of the time, right?
Mhm.
And based on your presentation, I really did a lot of reflection throughout the whole presentation because I was really wanted to go to industry, but over the past years of my studies, my lecturers have been encouraging me to do my PhD because they find that my writing that I've got some writing skills,
Mhm.
and also I can also teach people. So it makes me think that how about like I go to the industry first, a few years to get experience, like you have shared just now, and perhaps I might consider to work in the academia. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I think
it's yeah.
it's very
I just want
doable.
to share. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
very doable. I think the biggest challenge with that, which is
Mm.
something even I faced, after you haven't been in school for a while and you've been making, a
Mhm.
decent salary, it's a little hard to give that up and go back to a PhD program.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, like I said, while I got a stipend, um, and for a single person, it would probably cover your living expenses. If you were married and already had children at that point where you were getting ready to go back and get the PhD, it might be a little more difficult financially, right? Unless your spouse was working while you were in school. Um, so there are lots of things to consider, but I do really think it's incredibly important for people to have some work experience. And it doesn't have to be even 5 years like I had. I know many people who have maybe 2 or 3 years of work experience and then they go back and get their PhD. And it's really just having that little bit where you've actually been in the shoes where your students will eventually be. It gives you a lot of credibility in your teaching. And the other thing I didn't mention is it's amazing how those years of work experience, whether it's 2 or 5 or 3, they can really give you insights into good research ideas. My topic I ended up choosing to research for my dissertation was based solely on experiences I had in industry. And I would have never come up with that dissertation idea if I hadn't worked in industry.
Yeah. One more. Because my aunt is currently a lecturer, and she's teaching the industrial people, but somehow over her experience over the last 2 years, I think, she shared with me that she had encountered those industry people look down on doctors, on professionals in the academia. Perhaps that they look down in the sense that, oh, these people don't really know what's happening in the industry because they are lecturers. So, what's
Mhm.
your view on this? Does this happen in the United States also?
Yeah, I've seen that on occasion. I think, there are a couple things you can do to combat that. One, I have always tried to research things that would be interesting to people in industry. I know a lot of people in industry don't read like the journals where I'm publishing research, but it is important for us as academics to try to research things that are important to industry. And so if you look, you will often find publications like the Wall Street Journal or Forbes or Business Week, they'll often be citing academic research. And so I think whenever we're able to do research that is interesting to those outlets and to people in industry, that's a good thing. I think another thing as faculty members, what we can do to kind of fight against what you were talking about is really interact with industry. So whether that is bringing guest speakers into our classes to expose them to our students and allow us to keep more up to date with what's going on with industry, whether it is maybe taking on roles like being an internship coordinator at your school, which allows you to really interact with businesses. I know my department chair interacts with businesses all the time. And so you do have to be a little creative and maybe take on some additional responsibilities. But there are a lot of ways we can stay connected to industry. And I think when we do that as a profession, that does help to dispel some of those myths for industry that we don't know what's going on.
All right.
Yeah, Dr. Rasmussen, we have two questions in the chat.
Okay, can you want to read
Yeah,
those to me?
sure. For the first question is from Dayon. He's actually one of the fall 2020 inductees that we have. He
Hi, Dan.
asks, he asks, how are the PhD admissions at UTA affected because of COVID? Are there less or more students signing up for the PhD program?
That is a great question. So I can tell you, let me tell you a little bit about last spring, which I know about. So last spring, we admitted um, we admitted 3 PhD students last spring at UTA in accounting. I don't know about the other business disciplines, but that was accounting. Um, it was more challenging because with COVID, UTA often accepts a lot of international students into our PhD program, and we had some visa issues with those students being able to get over here to start classes in the fall. So, like I said, we admitted 3 students. 2 of them were able to get over here this fall. One was a US-based student, but the other was able to physically get to the US in order to begin the program. But the third student who was admitted had not yet been able to get a visa, and so that student is still in her home country this year. But they were able, because of COVID, to work out a deal where she is taking part in the classes virtually. Um, she isn't able to have that stipend for the assistantship because she's not physically located in the United States. So they can't pay her as an employee because she's not in the United States. But the hope is she will be on UTA's campus next fall and really a full-fledged member then of the PhD class. I know they are in the process right now of working to accept students for next fall. I believe they had a reasonable number of applicants. Again, the concern is just ability to get visas and physically get over into the country. But UTA has typically conducted all of its PhD student interviews virtually as long as I've been at UTA. And so at least that hasn't had to disrupt the application process at all. They're just doing lots of Zoom and Teams type calls with students to conduct the interviews.
And we also have a question from Faria. Faria is one of our BGS members. Faria asks, there are times when there is a lack of motivation to continue moving forward. How would you suggest finding that motivation to keep yourself on track?
That is a great question. And I think that's particularly important to think about if you're interested in pursuing a PhD, because unfortunately, I think one thing about academia and especially the research side of it is it feels like most of the feedback you get is negative. um, you know, there are always issues with maybe what you've done in terms of your research or a better way to do it. And so it feels like whenever you present a paper or even whenever you submit it to a journal, you're always getting negative feedback, and nobody ever loves it from the start, right? And so it really is a process of staying motivated, um, keeping your long-term goals in sight, and thinking not about necessarily kind of the drudgery of getting through this week, but more, what is it I'm working toward and what is it I want to accomplish long term. I think also surrounding yourself with people who are going through similar things as you is important, because they can provide support when you're down or when you're lacking that motivation. I know when I was a PhD student, my cohort and I were very close, and we still keep in very close contact. They're some of my best friends. And we were a great support system for each other. We would get together for dinner once a month just to have some social interaction with our spouses and families outside of class. And like I said, we still keep in touch and provide support to each other today. So I think it's important to have support systems, um, keep those long-term goals in focus, and not let yourself get down about the little things. When you do have successes, whether it's a great review on a paper or an invitation to revise and resubmit, even if there's a lot they want you to change, or making it through those comprehensive exams, whatever it might be, you also really need to celebrate all of those little things when they do happen, because it will feel like there's big droughts of maybe negativity or just struggles along the way. So be sure to celebrate when the good things do happen.
That's awesome. We don't have any questions in the chat yet, but I don't know if there's time for one more. It's exactly
Sure.
8 p.m.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
If somebody does have a question, you're more than welcome to unmute your mic or use the chat feature. Looks like there are no questions coming in.
Okay. Well, I hope I gave you all a little bit of food for thought. Academia may not be something you had thought about until now is a possible career choice, but I hope you will seriously consider it. You are all some of the best students out there in business as members of BGS, and this is something that, may not have initially been on your radar, but this is something, like I said, you could pursue even long term as a non-tenure track position. So I hope you'll keep it in mind.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Rasmussen, for a wonderful presentation.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for joining in. Be sure to tune in with the 2 other meetings that are coming up. We have a meeting tomorrow with Beta Gamma Sigma ICESI, which is in Colombia. And then on Saturday, we have our final meeting with BGS IMT Ghaziabad in India. We look forward to wrapping up this amazing event together in a strong fashion. Again, I'd like to thank Dr. Rasmussen again for her time to give such a wonderful presentation. And more importantly, I'd like to thank all the people that joined in, whether you're from UTA or whether you're staying up in Malaysia to watch us. I really appreciate that. It's great having you all, and stay safe, stay warm if you're in Texas. And yeah, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye,
Take care.
everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.